probably learned more about empathy from my father than from any teacher that I ever had. My dad was a small town pharmacist. We operated a family-run drugstore in a little town in Louisiana. And he was fairly well-to-do by local standards. He wouldn't be a rich man by Cuttery standards, but by local standards, we were well off. And so it was not unusual for people to come into the drugstore and engage my father in conversation and ask to borrow money. Now, my dad had a way of handling that request that I think was particularly demonstrative of empathy. He would say, well, you know, I'd really like to help you out. But you see, I have this agreement with Mr. Hurd down at the bank. Mr. Hurd has agreed that he won't fill any prescriptions, and I've agreed that I won't make any loans. Now, essentially what he did in that is he turned the request into a joke. And he said no in a very inoffensive way. That shows a high degree of empathy. You know, he understands the problem. He doesn't want to grant the request, but he wants to find a way to allow the other person to not feel embarrassed that he was rejected. So that's an example of the way someone with leadership skills and empathy in particular can handle that sort of situation. So empathy is most easily recognized characteristic in a leader, but in business it's seldom directly rewarded. But it will get lots of rewards indirectly because it's essential to higher levels of leadership. Empathy means thoughtfully considering an employee's feelings, among other factors, in making decisions. We all remember teachers and mentors who exhibited empathy for us growing up. It's equally important in an organizational leader. Why is it important in a leader today in particular? Well, increasingly we use teams to address our organizational goals rather than individuals. So team building, the ability to communicate with teams and to project a mission beyond just the immediate goal is quite important. The world is changing rapidly and globalizing very rapidly. So this means, handling difficult situations, handling difficult clients is very important. And there's a strong need to retain talent within the organization. If you look at companies like Apple or Microsoft or Google, they have huge market caps. Compare those market caps to their actual hard assets. Their assets represent a tiny fraction of the value of those companies. The rest of the value is in the intellectual property, it's in the branding, it's in the combined human capital associated with that business. So retaining that talent is a key aspect of retaining and building value within organizations. And then finally, the highest of these competencies is the ability to nurture relationships. The definition is proficiency in managing relationships and building networks, and ability to find common ground and build rapport. I tell my students that I have never met a successful entrepreneur who was not a superb networker. They tend to have deep Rolodexes and great memories for people with particular expertise, particular talent, particular backgrounds. The hallmarks of someone with that ability are effectiveness in leading change, persuasiveness, and expertise in building and leading teams of people. It's not just a matter of friendliness, although people with this skill are seldom mean-spirited. It means using friendliness to move people, clients, employees, others, in directions that you want them to go. And socially skilled people tend to have a broad network of friends and acquaintances. They're people who know lots of people. Now, I would maintain in this part of the world, who you know is very, very important, particularly so. This is a culture that respects those networks. And so it's very important to nurture relationships with clients, with friends, with other businesses, and so on. And people with this attribute have essentially mastered the first 4 elements of emotional intelligence. So here are some suggestions that I have if you aspire to be a leader in your organization. The first is get to know as many people in the organization as you can. And not just know them professionally, get to know them personally. Find out what makes them tick. You know, what their capabilities, expertise, goals, personalities, strengths, and weaknesses are. Develop the ability to define goals, both short and long-term, clearly and concisely, so that people understand the goals. And leave time for fun and celebration on the job. You'll get far more productivity out of people if work is allowed to be fun. So, you know, yes, it's serious, but there's an element of social interaction and relief of tension in it. Organizations tend to take on the values and the attributes of the leader. So it's important that a leader constantly communicate his vision and the importance of the organization's mission. Why does the world need your organization? Why is it better off if you succeed? You need to maintain disciplined self-control, avoid impulsive judgments, and particularly avoid deprecating remarks about employees in front of other employees. Delegate real responsibility and authority. Responsibility and authority are real motivating factors for employees. And one of the most frustrating things to an employee is to be delegated a responsibility without the authority to get it done. So when you delegate something, and the best leaders are very good delegators, they need to delegate both responsibility and authority. Don't focus on today's challenges. Assume that the organization is going to solve today's challenges. The best leaders are always looking the next move or two down the chessboard. So concentrate on tomorrow's challenges. Be certain that the organization has the awareness, the talent, the systems in place to deal with the challenges that are yet to appear. Retain and motivate all key employees. Relentlessly maintain an optimistic attitude. If we all work hard, if we work smart, we're going to win. Always show respect for all members of your organization and at all levels. There may be days when the shipping clerk is the most important person in your organization in terms of achieving those short-term goals. So make everybody feel important. And always give praise in public. Always give advice or correction in private. Never, ever embarrass an employee in front of other employees. When in a leadership role, hire only the very best people that you can find. Implement a structured planning process with broad participation so that everybody knows not only what we're doing, but how we're going to do it. And everybody participates in the creation of those plans. Be sure that you get buy-in from all the key players in those plans. Monitor closely to make sure that you're staying on track. Reward those who will tell you, Tom, you're wrong about this, because you're not always going to be right. Give broad credit to and reward those who contribute to the organization's success, and always credit others for your own success. Never take credit yourself for your own success. Another bit of advice is that demotions almost never work. So if an employee is not working out in their current position, hard as it is, it's best to part company. Separation is virtually always best, both for the organization and often for the employee as well. Be careful to orchestrate the separation in a way that does not disparage the separated employee, and then be equally careful to replace that employee with a person who's clearly better, clearly greater potential. Maximize the use of oral communications. Memorandums are one-way communication. Conversations are two-way. Use stories and metaphors to provide vivid and memorable communications with employees. Steve Jobs was absolutely fabulous at this. I don't know if any of you have seen the television interview that's known as the Lost interview. It was lost for many years, but discovered just shortly after his death, and it's now available on YouTube. I really recommend that you watch it. But he's asked a rather tough question by the interviewer in this interview, and the interviewer is recalling what he had heard from the members of the Apple Macintosh team that Steve Jobs had driven mercilessly to get the Apple product out. And the interviewer says, I've talked to many of the members of that team, and they all regard it as one of the highlights of their career, but almost universally they say, I could never do that again. I just couldn't go through it. And he asked Jobs to react to this. And Jobs reacts with a wonderful story. He says, when I was a kid, he said there was a rather scary old man who lived down the street. He said, I think he was a widower. And he said he asked me to mow his lawn a few times, and I got to know him. And he said one day, he called me in to his garage, and he said, I want to show you something. And he said he pulled out an ugly old rock tumbler, a can with a belt and a motor. And he said, come with me. And they went into the backyard of this man's house, and they picked up some just sort of ugly old rocks, in the backyard. And they put them in this machine along with some grit and some liquid, and they sealed it up, and he turned on the motor, and it started going clank, 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 clank. And the fellow said, come back tomorrow. And he said, I came back tomorrow, and we opened up that rock tumbler, and what we took out were these absolutely beautiful polished rocks. He said what had been just ugly old rocks the day before had now become these beautiful polished stones. And he said that's always been my metaphor for a team of people working really hard at something worth doing. He said you have some noise, you have some fights, you have some disagreements, but what tends to happen is those people tend to polish one another. And what comes out is this beautiful product. Now, that's an extraordinary ability to use stories and metaphors to communicate deep values and deep ambitions. So it shows what a leader Jobs was, what an extraordinary leader he was. And so directness and honesty in communications are most important. And we'll close with a quotation from a Frenchman by the name of Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, who said, "I'm more afraid of an army of 100 sheep led by a lion than I am an army of 100 lions led by a sheep." I'll be happy to take your questions. Yes.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, first of all, thank you very much. It was very inspiring. Nowadays, people are not engaged. We have many surveys, college surveys. They mentioned that 70% of people are not engaged. So we have an engagement problem. People, they don't motivate themselves. When we talk with them, except because of this reason, I'm not motivated. I don't like to work here. So it's hard to maintain the motivation level. The second thing is managers, especially some senior managers, they are not open to get feedback. Because we need to get feedback to learn what's happening, how they feel, to create an empathy. But there is sometimes resistance to get feedback, especially in this culture. We can see more examples than the other more open cultures. So how we can manage this? How we can impact leaders to get more feedback?
Well,
can you give some examples?
I don't think there are any magic bullets for the kind of problem that you described. What I can tell you is that there's a fair amount of work that goes on in organizations that's just plain routine and boring. And it's very hard to get employees engaged and motivated if the basic work is routine and boring. But there are things that leaders can do that tend to mitigate that. One is the fun and celebration on the job. Providing some relief from that boredom with, some social activities in the organization. It can be as simple as celebrating an employee's birthday. It can be, congratulating an employee on maybe an achievement of their child, or maybe they have a sports champion in their family or something like that. But tending to make it more human, less impersonal, tends to help in those situations. And there are a lot of other suggestions I could make along those lines, mixing up the roles. I'll tell you a story about a very successful company back in the United States. The company was called Scientific Data Systems, and it was run by a brilliant entrepreneur by the name of Max Palevsky, who went on to become a founding investor and board member in a little company you've heard of called Intel, and helped to guide Intel to its global success in microcomputing. But in the early days of Scientific Data Systems, which made a very advanced small computer back in the 1960s, there was a lot of infighting amongst his key officers. His finance guy was fighting with the manufacturing guy, who was fighting with the engineering guy, and so on and so forth. And there were a couple of these guys that came into Max's office one day and wanted Max to resolve the conflict between them. And Max did a brilliant thing. He said to the engineer, "From now on, you're running manufacturing." And to the manufacturer, he said, "From now on, you're running engineering." By the end of that year, he had reversed the roles of several other of the key managers in his company. And after 6 months, he did another musical chairs kind of thing, in which he moved again By the time he got done, it took him 2 years, but every key manager in his company had run every key organization in the company. So they all understood how each of the other departments worked and what, alligators the other guy was wrestling with. What it did was it knitted together a tremendous team. So it's a little hard to do that at a lower level, but mixing up the assignments so that one person is not just constantly doing the same boring thing is one of the ways to kind of enrich that environment. There probably are many, many others, but at least those are things that come off the top of my head. Other questions? Okay, it's my pleasure to speak to you today, and Mr. Hussain, glad to